Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the nation and held a press conference explaining and defending the cabinet decision to insist that Israel remain on the Philadelphia axis as a condition for Israeli agreement to a hostage for ceasefire deal proposed by mediators. The Prime Minister's comments came after U.S. President Joe Biden said Netanyahu was not doing enough to reach a deal. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
Prime Minister Netanyahu began his comments by apologizing to the families of the 6 hostages who were executed last week by Hamas and asked for their forgiveness. He also claimed that the IDF was very close to rescuing the 6 alive.
ואני חוזר ואומר גם הערב, אני מבקש את סליחתכם שלא הצלחנו להביא אותם חזרה בחיים. היינו קרובים, אבל לא הצלחנו. ואני חוזר ואומר גם הערב, ישראל לא תעבור לסדר היום על הטבח הזה. החמאס ישלם על כך מחיר כבד מאוד.
Standing in front of a map of Gaza and Israel for illustration, Netanyahu insisted that Israel will never withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, this to prevent Hamas from taking hostages out of Gaza to Sinai and ultimately to Iran. According to Netanyahu, the Egyptian border corridor is of strategic importance, calling it the pipeline for Hamas oxygen and rearmament.
ציר הרשע צריך את ציר פילדלפי. ומאותה סיבה, אנחנו חייבים לשלוט בציר פילדלפי. חמאס מתעקש מהסיבה הזאת שלא נהיה שם, ומהסיבה הזאת אני מתעקש שכן נהיה שם.
The Prime Minister rejected the notion that Israel could not now change direction following the murder of the 6 Israeli hostages.
What has changed in the last 5 days? What has changed? One thing. These murderers executed 6 of our hostages. They shot them in the back of the head. That's what's changed. And now after this, we're asked to show seriousness? We're asked to make concessions?
Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments came after U.S. President Biden said a ceasefire hostage deal was very close, and Netanyahu was not doing enough to make it happen now.
Are you planning to present a final hostage deal to the both sides this week?
We're very close to that.
What makes you think that this deal will be successful in a way that the other deals were not?
Hope springs eternal.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Do you have a message for the hostages' family, sir?
Yes, I've spoken to the American hostage. I spoke to his mom and dad, and we're not giving up. We're going to continue to push as hard as we can. Thank you.
After Netanyahu's speech, there were angry protests in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem outside the home of the Prime Minister. They were demanding that the Prime Minister and his government do more to bring the hostages home alive.
And joining us now with more on the importance of the Philadelphia corridor and the ongoing war against Hamas in Gaza is Jonathan Conricus, a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and a former IDF spokesperson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So the Prime Minister held a press conference last night detailing the importance of the Philadelphia corridor, saying Israel could not afford to leave or give it up. I mean, what can you tell us about this corridor? Why is it so important to Israel?
So I'll try to give an honest, professional opinion or point of view without getting into politics, like so many other things in Israel over this war and before the war. Almost everything is contaminated with politics, and what I will try to share is a military breakdown of what it is and why it's important. Let's go back to the disengagement from Gaza, 2005. The border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, on the Israeli code maps, the name of the road was called Philadelphia, and since then it's stuck and it has become the Philadelphia corridor. Nothing to do with the American city or Greek mythology. Why is it important? Because under the Philadelphia corridor, Hamas has established through civilians, workers, and a few others, willing helpers, Hamas has established a mesh of tunnels that go from the Palestinian side of Rafah to the smaller, but still existent, Egyptian side of Rafah. And what they've basically been doing since the first day that they took control over Gaza is to use those tunnels to import, smuggle weapons, explosives, and everything else that they wanted. And it would be difficult for them to get their hands on directly through Egypt, and it would be impossible to get through Kerem Shalom, the Israeli crossing. So that has been something that we Israel, we've known about it for years, more than 25 years. There have been tunnels there even before the disengagement. It's not something new. Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, and since then, that area has not been in our hands. What Hamas has been doing since, over the last 20 years or over the last 18 years that they have been in control over the Gaza Strip, is to expand, deepen, enhance, and solidify the tunnels that they have there. And today the tunnel network that existed before October 7th is a very robust tunnel system, but don't think tunnels that are small and cramped and, for personnel, the small tunnels that Hamas dug in order to infiltrate into Israel. Think industrial, think big enough for trucks to go in. Now, the purpose is to move commodities from the Egyptian side with the willing assistance of Egyptian authorities, and either turning a blind eye or collecting money, and that's an important part. The Egyptian authorities, the Egyptian military gains from the illicit trade and the smuggling from Egypt into Gaza. And what Hamas has been doing is simply transporting in weapons. All of the weapons that Hamas used on October the 7th to butcher Israeli civilians came in through the Philadelphia corridor. Maybe a small percentage came in above ground in the Rafah crossing, but I would say that Israeli assessments speak about the vast, overwhelming majority of weapons came in through these tunnels. This is why the tunnels are important, and this is why the Philadelphia corridor in itself has importance. Now, when Israel launched its offensive against Hamas 3 weeks after October 7, Israel decided to go for the northern part of the Gaza Strip and Gaza City. We didn't go for Philadelphia. At the time, I asked questions why, because in my mind, just as a lieutenant colonel in the military, to me it seemed very reasonable that we would go parallel on the center of gravity, which is Gaza City, but also immediately cut off the line of supply and basically the oxygen supply of Hamas.
And why didn't we?
That's a very good question. That the same person who did a press conference today for the first time in many, many months and actually answered questions and presented something to the Israeli public, that's a question for him and the cabinet to answer. I don't know. Above my pay grade, as you would say.
I do want to ask you, though, because there are conflicting reports. On the one hand, we hear from the defense establishment that we can leave the Philadelphia corridor, that we can leave, we can come back. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insisting that that's not the case. I mean, who's correct here? What's your assessment of this?
So my point of view would be that it doesn't matter so much if you are in Philadelphia, if you go back, if you leave it, if you can return. What matters is what are the plans, the military plans, for when you are there. What are the engineering activities and what are the military activities? Because sitting on top of Philadelphia corridor is pretty useless. You can control the Rafah crossing, which is important, but that is not where the bulk of weapons came in. What you need to do is a significant engineering operations where you basically have to dig a big canal or a tunnel across approximately 14 kilometers, say roughly 10 miles, from the southern part of the Gaza Strip all the way up to the ocean. That's the length of the Gaza Strip in that area. And do it deep enough, let's say 50 meters, 60 meters deep. So I'm talking about a significant engineering activity here, something that Israel can do if it wants to. That will ensure or make it extremely difficult for Hamas to return to smuggling. But unless Israel has intentions and plans and military engineering that is tasked to do that, then sitting on top of Philadelphia isn't really the important topic. So what I want to hear from my leaders is, okay, not only do we intend to sit and hold the Philadelphia corridor for political and negotiation purposes, but we also intend to take the military action to stop the tunneling and to stop Hamas from rebuilding.
But Israel has destroyed a significant number of tunnels on the Philadelphia corridor, has it not?
Yes, but it's going about it the cumbersome and indirect way. What Israel is doing now, what our brave soldiers are doing on the field while risking themselves and fighting a very ruthless enemy in Rafah, is that they're basically going for the openings. They're going for the shafts that they locate through lots of intel, lots of research, through interrogations of terrorists and compiling other sources of information. And then they go search for the entrance. They get the entrance and then they go down, they disable it, but large parts of the tunnel still exist and it can be accessible from other points, and terrorists, if they have the freedom to do so, will link up with them again. So a real solution would be an engineering project of national dimensions.
But we have to also remember the hostages, of course, as we just saw this weekend, hostages being held in the tunnels in Rafah. So that would, I assume, complicate matters in terms of having to destroy the tunnels.
But they're not the same tunnels. We're not talking about the same tunnels. According to all that we've seen so far and heard from hostages that were released and what we've seen in Hamas footage, etc., the tunnels where Israeli hostages have been kept for 333 days are probably not the smuggling tunnels. These are different areas. These are tunnels that aren't as deep, and these are tunnels that are extremely well hidden, and specifically not along that area in Rafah, because the terrorists know that that is a point of interest for Israel.
And so we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you one quick question about the ongoing hostage negotiations. You know, President Biden openly saying that Netanyahu is not doing enough to get a hostage deal. Netanyahu saying he's accepted the U.S. proposals, but it's Hamas that has rejected every deal that's been put on the table. Now the U.S. once again pressuring Israel. How much of, first of all, what do you make of this, the fact that the U.S. is pressuring Israel and not Hamas? And also, Biden saying he'll put forward this one final deal. Is Philadelphia the main issue holding up the deal, do you think?
First of all, the main issue holding up the deal is Hamas. Full stop. Hamas is the organization that stands to gain the most from not making a deal, and as such, I think that is the most important point. And I think that it's extremely regrettable that we find ourselves in a situation under this government and prime minister where there's such a tremendous deficit in trust and good faith between Israeli leadership and our closest and most important ally, that our closest and most important ally actually puts public pressure on us instead of on our enemy. But the most important thing, I think, that isn't discussed is what could force Hamas to the negotiations table and what could force Hamas to take our deal and to submit itself to our dictations. If Hamas is pressured and feels that its control over Gaza is at stake and jeopardized, then they would be incentivized to do more and to be more flexible, and what's important for us, to bring back live hostages. Currently, sadly, that is not the situation. The Israeli government and military but most importantly the government, hasn't put that kind of pressure on Hamas. And pressure on Hamas isn't tanks in the streets of Khan Yunis, Gaza, or Rafah. It is for Yahya Sinwar to understand that it's just a matter of time before he and his organization are out of power, and that the people of Gaza will rebel against him, and that there is an alternate government. Who will put that government in place? Who will make sure that that happens? One country, Israel. That's what we need to be doing in order to apply pressure. I think that will put Hamas's feet to the fire and higher the chances of us getting our beloved brothers and sisters back.
All right. Well, Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
And murdered American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Polin was laid to rest in Jerusalem on Monday as thousands lined the streets to pay their respects. Hersh has become one of the most familiar faces of the hostages. His parents, Rachel and Jonathan, took to every international stage to appeal to global leaders and pleaded for the release of their son for the past 11 months. He was murdered at point-blank range just days before IDF soldiers recovered his body over the weekend. In a heartbreaking farewell, Hersh's parents begged forgiveness from their son.
Hersh, we failed you. We all failed you. You would not have failed you.
Amidst the inexplicable agony terror, anguish, desperation, and fear, we became absolutely certain that you were coming home to us alive. But it was not to be. Now I no longer have to worry about you. I know you are no longer in danger. I think we all did every single thing we could. The hope that perhaps a deal was near was so authentic it was crunchy. It tasted close, but it was not to be so. Those beautiful six survived together, and those beautiful six died together, and now they will be remembered together forever.
And in other news, Hamas in yet another act of psychological terror, taunting the families of the hostages who lost their loved ones with the release of videos recorded just before their murders. The terror group also announced it would murder any remaining living hostages should the IDF close in on their location. ILTV's Devo Klein reports.
The Hamas terrorist group on Monday evening released a video with a recorded message from murdered hostage Eden Yerushalmi, whose body was recovered by the IDF over the weekend. She and another 5 hostages, U.S.-Israeli Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Ori Danino, Alex Lobanov, Carmel Gat, and Almog Sarusi, were found murdered in a tunnel in Rafah. All 6 are believed to have been murdered, shot in the head at point-blank range at least 1 or 2 days before their bodies were recovered. In the psychological terror video, part of which was cleared for publication by the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, the young 24-year-old is seen telling her family, "I love and miss you all so much." Following the release, her family wrote in a statement, quote, "Our Eden, we also love you and miss you so much. You will forever remain in our hearts." The terror group also released a video of the other 5 hostages, each sitting in front of the camera. They each say their names before the video transitions to still frames with a caption threatening to release their final statements before their murder. In a separate posting on Monday, Hamas admitted to murdering the hostages, implying they were executed because they were about to be rescued by the IDF. Hamas's Al-Qassam Brigade spokesman laid the blame on Israel and said that the terror group had issued new instructions to its guards on how to handle the hostages should the IDF approach the location where they are being held, implying it would murder the remaining living hostages. And also on Monday, Israeli news site Ynet obtained and released, with the family's permission, videos of 84-year-old former hostage Alma Avraham in captivity. In the video, she is seen with a bandaged arm being abducted by a terrorist, and in a second video is seen in captivity addressing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Avraham was kidnapped on October 7th and was released in the first hostage deal in critical condition. She was not visited once by the Red Cross during her time in captivity, nor received any medical aid from the organization.
Just horrible. And the fact that there are college students on U.S. campuses cheering Hamas on is just unfathomable. I mean, truly the worst of humanity.
In a world full of stories, whose voice will you trust? At ILTV, we deliver the truth from the heart of Israel and bring you the latest from Israel with integrity and passion. Join a community that believes in the strength and resilience of Israel. Your support means reliable, honest news direct from the source. Subscribe now. Be part of the story. Be part of Israel.
And moving on, the IDF anti-terror operation is continuing in Samaria with a focus on Jenin. Now ending its first week, Operation Summer Camps aims to preempt terror centers known to be planning attacks. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
There were exchanges of fire and airstrikes in the northern Samaria city of Jenin, long considered one of the major terror hotspots in the territories. The army says 14 terrorists have been killed and about 25 others arrested. Sappers neutralized about 30 explosive devices. The operation is in its 7th day, dubbed Summer Camps by the Army. The raids began simultaneously in Jenin, Tulkarem, and Tubas, with the goal of dismantling Iran-backed Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror networks operating in those cities. So far, according to the IDF, more than 30 gunmen have been killed in the operation, among them the head of the Hamas in Jenin and the head of Islamic Jihad in Tulkarem. One Israeli soldier has been killed in Jenin, and several more troops have been wounded in the raids. The raids in Tulkarem and Farah have since concluded, but troops are pressing on with operations in Jenin, where a drone strike was carried out against a group of Palestinians who were hurling explosives at troops. Senior IDF officials say that the operations in Jenin are primarily aimed at giving the military operational freedom to be able to act there in the future to thwart terror attacks. This was also the stated goal of the last major operation in Jenin more than a year ago.
And it's day 333 of the war in Gaza, and it was also another day of cross-border rocket fire on the northern border. The IDF pounded Hezbollah targets and reportedly killed 2 people. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The Air Force strike in the city of Naqoura killed 2 people in a car who local officials say worked for a cleaning company under UNIFIL contract. There is speculation that they were Hezbollah operatives working in disguise. The UNIFIL force patrols along the border. The IDF said only that it carried out overnight strikes on a number of Hezbollah buildings in the area. Hours later, 5 rockets were fired from Lebanon toward Israel, setting off sirens in a number of communities. Air raid sirens also rang out in Israeli communities near the border, including in Ein Yaakov, near Ma'alot Tarshiha, as well as Shomerah, closer to the border. So far, the skirmishes have resulted in 26 civilian deaths on the Israeli side, as well as the deaths of 20 IDF soldiers and reservists. Hezbollah has named 432 members who have been killed by Israel during the ongoing skirmishes. It's day 333 of the war in Gaza. The IDF believes that Hamas has now given standing orders to operatives holding hostages to execute them if they think Israeli forces are closing in. This after findings indicate that 6 Israeli captives were executed by Hamas guards as Israeli troops closed in on a Rafah tunnel complex. Troops in Rafah must now operate even more carefully, knowing that additional hostages might be in the area.
And moving on, Britain says it will immediately suspend 30 of its 350 arms export licenses with Israel. According to the British government, the licenses will be withheld because the equipment might be used to commit serious violations of international humanitarian law. Foreign Minister Lammy said the decision to suspend the licenses did not amount to a blanket ban or an arms embargo, but only involved those that could be used in the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Palestinian enclave of Gaza. British exports amount to less than 1% of the total arms Israel receives, and Lammy told Parliament the suspension would not have a material impact on Israel's security. Among the items that will come under the suspension will be components for military aircraft, including fighter jets, helicopters, and drones. In response, Foreign Minister Katz said to the decision that Israel operated according to international law. Katz said London's decision sends a very problematic message to Hamas and its sponsors in Iran. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said he was deeply disheartened by Britain's announcement.
Sagot Winery, where passion meets tradition. Nestled in the heart of Binyamin, our vineyards yield exquisite wines crafted with generations of expertise.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Partly cloudy skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures reaching lows of about 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, mostly sunny skies and warm weather are expected as temperatures should rise to highs of 32 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channel, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, iltv.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gravelazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.